All right, listen. This story is something that still sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. It happened when I was working up in the mountains in Colorado as a ski instructor. Now, I know that doesn't exactly sound like a horror story setting, but trust me, it gets pretty wild. So, it was a regular day in the middle of the ski season, and I had just finished teaching a group of beginners how to snowplow and was about to head back to the lodge for a well-deserved break. You know, the usual stuff, a cup of hot cocoa, maybe a slice of pie. But then I noticed something odd on one of the distant slopes. It was this strange, dark figure against the white snow. Now, at first I thought it was just a fellow skier who had maybe wandered off track, but something about the shape of the figure just didn't sit right with me. I decided to get a closer look, thinking that maybe someone was in trouble. As I skied closer, I noticed that the figure wasn't moving at all, and it certainly wasn't any skier. Standing right there in the middle of the snowy slope was this creature, something I had never seen or heard of before. This thing stood at about 7 feet tall, with a muscular build, covered in a shaggy coat that was as black as the night sky. Its face was something right out of a horror movie. It had glowing yellow eyes, a snout that looked somewhat canine but more elongated and distorted. Its ears, now those were something else. They were long and pointed, almost like a fox's but bigger. And then there was its tail, a long furry appendage that swished back and forth in an almost hypnotic manner. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest like a wild drum. I could feel my blood turn cold as the creature turned its head and looked directly at me. Its eyes had this eerie glow that seemed to penetrate through the falling snow. Now, I've been around wildlife before, and I've even had a couple of close encounters with bears, but this was something entirely different. This creature was like nothing I had ever seen, and I had no idea what to do. But then, it did something I will never forget. It let out a low growl that echoed through the otherwise silent mountainside. The sound sent shivers down my spine and jolted me back into action. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I turned my skis downhill and pushed off, going as fast as I could. I didn't dare look back. I could hear the creature's growls growing louder and closer, and my heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Just when I thought I couldn't go any faster, I hit a patch of ice and lost control. I went tumbling down the slope, my skis flying off, and my vision blurred with snow and fear. When I finally came to a stop, I looked up, expecting to see the creature bearing down on me. But it was gone. I lay there in the snow, panting and shaking, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I didn't know where the creature had gone, and frankly, I didn't want to know. I managed to get up, find my skis, and make my way back to the lodge. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen. Who would believe me anyway? But I know what I saw. I know that something is out there in the Colorado mountains, and every time I go back to the slopes, I can't shake it off. All right, this one is a story that I rarely share because it feels so unbelievable, but I swear to you it's true. It was back when I was helping a buddy of mine out on his farm up in North Dakota. A big piece of land, around 800 acres or so, right on the edge of a dense forest. He had this herd of sheep he was raising, around 30 or 40 of them. And if you've ever had anything to do with sheep farming, you'll know that protecting them from predators is a big part of the job. So he had these 6 or 7 feeding pens scattered around the farm, and we had to keep a close eye on them, especially during the night. Anyway, one winter evening, I was out doing my rounds. It was around 5 p.m. and the sun was setting fast. I'd just finished checking the last feeding pen and was heading back to the farmhouse. It was pretty cold and the ground was crunchy under my boots. The sheep were all huddled together, eating, and everything seemed fine. But as I was walking away from the pen, I heard this strange sound. It was like a low growl, but not like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was more vibrating somehow, and it seemed to echo in the quiet winter evening. I turned back, squinting in the dying light, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. The sheep seemed undisturbed, still munching away on their feed. The growling stopped, and after a moment, I shrugged it off and continued back to the house. Just as I was about to step onto the porch, I heard the sound again. But this time it was louder, closer. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I whipped around, but all I could see was the dark silhouette of the feeding pen in the forest beyond. That's when I saw it. A pair of eyes glowing in the darkness, staring right at me. They were high off the ground, at least 7 feet, and I could just make out a large, hulking shape beneath them. Well, let's see. Where was I? Right, the air had that chill to it. And as the sky darkened, the shadows in the woods seemed to grow longer and somehow more menacing. As I started walking towards the shed, I could hear the crunching of leaves under my feet. It was quiet. Eerily so. I had a flashlight with me, one of those heavy-duty ones. I switched it on and its beam cut through the darkness, creating a small island of light in the vast ocean of shadows. I was about halfway to the shed when I heard it. A rustling sound. It was subtle at first, barely audible over the wind rustling through the trees. But then it got louder. I stopped in my tracks, the beam of my flashlight swinging wildly as I tried to locate the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from my left, from the thick undergrowth that bordered the path to the shed. I shone my flashlight in that direction, the light illuminating the bushes and the ground beneath. There was nothing there, or at least nothing that I could see. I remember thinking that it was probably just a raccoon or maybe a deer. So I continued my walk towards the shed, but that sense of unease, that feeling that something was off, it didn't leave me. The shed was just up ahead now. I could see its silhouette against the darkening sky. I hastened my steps, eager to get the generator started and return to the safety of my cabin. But then, I heard that rustling sound again. This time it was much closer. I turned around, my flashlight illuminating the path I had just walked. And that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing in the darkness, staring right at me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I froze, the beam of my flashlight fixed on those eyes. The creature's movements were erratic, and its gaze was wild. Its eyes were sinister, set in a face that was a strange mix of reptilian and mammalian features. It was bipedal, but its stance was hunched, like a gorilla's, and it had long, muscular arms that it used for balance as it moved. But what terrified me the most was the size of this creature. It was immense, towering over the trees around it, and I estimated it to be at least 8 feet tall. Suddenly it let out a terrifying roar, a sound that resonated through the still forest and chilled my blood. It was a guttural, animalistic sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. I could see its chest heaving, and the raw power in its voice was enough to make me feel utterly insignificant. As it roared, it threw its head back, revealing a wide, gaping maw filled with rows of sharp teeth. I could see the glint of saliva on its teeth, and the sight of it was enough to send me into a state of panic. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. I was frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. But then, something happened that snapped me out of my trance. The creature turned its attention to me. Its eyes, glowing in the darkness, locked onto mine. I could feel the intensity of its gaze, and I knew without a doubt that I was its next target. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, its heavy footsteps echoing in my ears. But I didn't dare to look back. I ran with all the strength I had, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Suddenly I stumbled and fell, a sharp pain shooting up my leg. I twisted my ankle. Lying there on the forest floor, I could hear the creature closing in on me. I could see its shadow looming over me, its breath hot and foul. In the last moment, as the creature lunged at me, a bright flash of light burst through the forest. The creature reeled back, letting out a deafening roar of pain. I looked up, squinting through the brightness, and saw a figure standing between me and the creature. It was a park ranger, holding a flare gun. The bright light from the flare seemed to hurt the creature. It roared again, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. The ranger helped me up, and together we limped towards safety. From that day on, I never went back to that forest. I moved to a different state, started a new life. But even now, years later, the memory of that terrifying encounter haunts my dreams. I often wonder what might have happened if the ranger hadn't arrived when he did. One thing is for sure, I will never forget the sight of that creature and the fear it instilled in me. It was a reminder of just how much unknown there still is in our world, lurking in the shadows. I can never tell this story without first giving the disclaimer that I am not insane. My mind did not make up what I saw, nor have I ever hallucinated in my life. Every living or spiritually living thing in this world is not accounted for. Everything cannot be explained. I live on in Native American reservation in Ontario, Canada. I have had the blessing of being able to grow up around my culture, with some Western knowledge as well. A big part of my culture is tradition and folklore, which we take very seriously. The first stories that children hear aren't academic ones or movies, but straight from the elder's mouth. We spend hours talking and learning from one another, soaking up the knowledge to pass on to our own kids. We talked about spirits, gods, miracles, and at times the demonic beings that lived among us. But we were never scared, fully knowing that we would always be protected. So protected that to this day, 4 years later, I'm still not scared of the contact I had with one. My mother, however, despises everything remotely demonic or subversive. If she knew I came into contact with one, she would probably think I need healing to this day. But my divine protection prevents me from ever being in danger from otherworldly beings. I have always been an outdoorsy person and lover of all things considered manly. From woodcutting to fishing and hunting, me and my cousins were partly in charge of the livelihood of our family. We enjoyed our duties so much, even when not doing them for the family, we did them leisurely. Our survival instinct and courageousness always kept us safe, able to find our way home. Our parents and families never worried because they had faith in our internal abilities. This can be confusing for some because a lot of societies globally are constructed so that people often fear for their safety. Kids would never be as free to roam unharmed in other places. But that was the beauty of my culture and living on the reservation. But like all kids, we found a way to get hurt somehow. One day, while swimming in a rough stream, one of my cousins hit her head on a rock after getting caught in a current. Luckily, she survived after being carried home safely by us. From that moment on, the kids were assigned an older cousin or uncle to tag along. We still had our freedom, but in a society without cell phones, we needed an extra layer of protection. In case of an emergency, we had a reliable semi-adult with more medicinal knowledge and common sense than us. Well, that's what they intended, because we ended up getting stuck with the still slightly immature cousin. We had so much fun together, and we learned a lot from him along the way. At the same time, it was his immaturity that led us to the creature in the first place. I know I said I wasn't scared of any demonic creature, but that doesn't mean I would purposely try to find one. But of course, a cooler older cousin would be the perfect person to persuade me. It started with him telling us many stories about superstitions and old folklore that our elders never told us. Now that I'm older, I can see he was over-exaggerating at times on purpose. How the story developed depended on our reactions more than the story itself. They were never too frightening, just the usual prehistoric-looking animal fights, weird sounds coming from the forest. Whatever he could think of to pass the time and get a reaction, he would say. I became really interested when he started talking about the non-animal-looking creatures that live in the forest. I couldn't believe that animal-human hybrid-looking things could ever exist. Once again, being a child without access to picture books and movies, I had never seen anything of the sort. Word of mouth and hearing stories of folklore no longer scratched the itch I had. I started asking everyone questions about what's in the forest. I was careful to avoid asking those who were known to be extremely anti-demon. Even though I never directly said demon, I knew they would assume I meant scary creatures, not spirits. On our next fishing expedition, I gathered the courage to ask my cousin if we could look for one of the creatures. He honestly looked shocked at first, as if he was telling us the stories to make us not want to go looking for trouble. He agreed anyway, and we decided we would take our weapons to go hunting deeper in the forest than we'd ever been. We waited until all our fishing and wood chopping was done before sneaking off. We started our trek through the woods, only finding a few rabbits along the way. The trees seemed to get thicker and thicker the further we went. Starting to get discouraged, we sat in the leaves, listening to more details of what we were looking for. He told us we needed to be on the lookout for it, but be careful not to look in its eyes or stare too long. Once we caught a glimpse that should be enough to prove it, and we had to leave. This caught me off guard because we didn't get a caution speech like this before leaving. We continued on, before smelling the distinct smell of rotting flesh. Whether human or animal, we couldn't tell, but it was rancid. Looking around, we tried to tell which direction it was coming from. Instead, we saw it would look like an overgrown, mutated deer human walking on 2 feet. Its yellowish eyes flashed toward us before our cousin said, "Stop!" Had he not added a word to our attention, I would have kept looking because it was that bizarre. I had seen a lot of animals, but never in my life had I come across something this size. While we knew that it was real, as in something that we all saw, it did not seem like a tangible, living being. The scent we smelled was utter death. Whatever it was not of this earth.